The shackles bit into Thalira's wrists as she stood beneath the twin suns of Novali's prime, her once-proud shoulders now hunched in defeat. The iridescent blue markings along her arms, symbols of her noble house, seemed to pulse with shame under the harsh light. Around her, the Novalian High Council stood in judgment, their elongated forms wrapped in ceremonial cloaks that rippled like liquid mercury. Thalira Vexer, daughter of the Third House, for your participation in the resistance against our treaty with the Terran Alliance, you are hereby sentenced to permanent exile, announced High Counselor Javik, his voice resonating through the crystalline chamber. You will be transported across the Krell wastes to the neutral territories where you may seek asylum, if you survive the journey. A murmur rippled through the assembled crowd. The Krell wastes were notorious, a radiation-scarred desert spanning thousands of kilometers, home to outlaw bands and monstrous creatures mutated by the ancient wars. Few Novalians who entered ever returned. Your transport and escort have been arranged through the Interspecies Peace Authority, Javik continued, his four eyes narrowing. As required by the treaty, your driver will be human. Thalira's heart seemed to freeze mid-beat. Humans, the destroyers of worlds, the creatures who had forced Novalis to surrender after a devastating orbital bombardment 20 cycles ago. The monsters who, according to every history she'd studied in the Resistance, conquered through brutality and kept control through fear. This is barbaric, she hissed, her translucent secondary eyelids flicking rapidly in distress. You might as well execute me now. Javik leaned forward. That was an option favored by many on this council, child. Consider this mercy. 2 hours later, Thalira stood at the edge of the capital city's transport hub, a small pack of permitted possessions at her feet. Her ceremonial robes had been replaced with practical desert gear, though they'd left her the necklace bearing her house insignia. A final mockery, she thought bitterly. What use was noble blood in exile? The transport pulled into view, a rugged, solar-powered land vehicle with massive wheels designed for the harsh terrain ahead. It was dusty, utilitarian, nothing like the elegant hovercrafts of Novalian design. Emblazoned on its side was the emblem of the Interspecies Peace Authority, a galaxy with a handshake superimposed across it. Thalira had once defaced such symbols during resistance rallies. The driver's door swung open, and Thalira instinctively stepped back. He was tall for a human, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of Novalian copper ore. His hair was cropped short on the sides but longer on top, dark with streaks of silver that suggested he was well into his 4th decade. A jagged scar ran from his right temple to his jaw. He wore practical clothing, reinforced fabric pants, a fitted thermal jacket with multiple pockets, and heavy boots. No weapons were visible, but Thalira knew humans concealed their tools of death. Thalira Vexer? His voice was deeper than she'd expected, with an accent that softened the sharp clicks of her name. I'm Ronan Vale, your IPA-assigned transport to the neutral territories. She stared at him, searching for the cruelty she'd been taught to expect. Instead, his expression remained professionally neutral as he extended a document tablet. Verification of identity and transfer orders. Your thumbprint, please. Her hands trembled slightly as she pressed her thumb to the screen, leaving a faint blue imprint. The human, Ronan, nodded and stowed the tablet in his jacket. Your restraints will remain for the first day's travel, as per protocol, he said, gesturing toward the passenger's side. After we've cleared the first checkpoint, they'll be removed if you've demonstrated compliance. And if I haven't, Thalira challenged, lifting her chin. For the first time, something flickered in his eyes, not anger but perhaps weariness. Then we both have a longer, more difficult journey ahead of us, he replied simply. Your choice. He loaded her small pack into the transport's rear compartment and opened the passenger door, standing aside to allow her entry without touching her. Thalira hesitated, then climbed awkwardly into the seat, her shackled hands making the process ungainly. As Ronan settled into the driver's seat and initiated the vehicle's systems, Thalira turned to stare out the window at her homeland, perhaps for the last time. The gleaming spires of the capital receded as they passed through the city's outer ring and toward the wasteland beyond. 14 days to the border, weather permitting, Ronan said after several minutes of silence. We have supplies for 20 questions. Thalira kept her gaze fixed on the landscape outside. Just one. How many of my kind have you delivered to their deaths, human? Ronan's hands tightened, almost imperceptibly, on the steering controls. None, he answered quietly. Every exile I've transported has reached their destination alive. I intend to maintain that record with you, Thalira Vexer. She turned to study him then, searching for the lie in his words. But his expression revealed nothing as the transport rumbled toward the waiting wasteland and the uncertain future beyond. 3 days into their journey across the Krell wastes, Thalira's restraints had been removed as promised, though she found herself uncertain what to do with this newfound freedom. The landscape outside had transformed from the lush purple vegetation of Novalis Prime's outskirts to endless stretches of rust-colored sand and jagged rock formations that seemed to reach toward the sky like accusing fingers. Ronan drove with focused precision, rarely speaking unless necessary. He'd established a routine, 8 hours of driving, followed by making camp as the brutal sun set, bringing the freezing desert night. Each evening he would prepare food rations for them both, careful to accommodate her different nutritional needs. "Why did you remove my restraints?" Thalira finally asked on the 4th night as they sat across from each other, a portable heat lamp between them casting shadows across the sand. "I could try to escape, or attack you." Ronan looked up from his meal, studying her with those copper-colored eyes. "Could you survive out there alone?" He gestured toward the darkness beyond their camp perimeter. "Without supplies or navigation?" "No," she admitted reluctantly. "As for attacking me," one corner of his mouth twitched slightly, "you're welcome to try, but I think we'd both prefer a peaceful journey." Thalira felt the ridge of spines along her back stiffen with indignation. "You assume I fear you." "I assume you're intelligent," he countered evenly, "and that you understand our mutual survival depends on cooperation." She fell silent, unable to argue with his logic. The stillness of the desert pressed around them, broken only by the occasional distant howl of some unseen creature. "You're not what I expected," she finally said, the words slipping out before she could reconsider. Ronan set down his plate. "What were you expecting?" "Cruelty, arrogance." Thalira stared into the heat lamp's glow. "Our histories describe humans as conquerors who enjoy displaying power over others." "Some are," he acknowledged with surprising candor. "Just as some Novalians sentenced you to cross the most dangerous territory on this planet rather than simply allowing you political asylum elsewhere." The comparison struck her like a physical blow. She'd never considered that her own people might be capable of the same cruelty they attributed to humans. "You speak as though you know our politics well," she observed. 14 transports across the Krell," he replied. "I've learned a few things." The following morning, as they resumed their journey, Thalira noticed Ronan frequently checking atmospheric readings on the transport's dashboard. Dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, tinged with an unnatural greenish hue. "Radiation storm," he explained before she could ask. "We need to find shelter within the next few hours." By midday, the sky had darkened ominously, and the wind carried particles that stung Thalira's sensitive skin. Ronan pushed the transport harder, scanning the rocky terrain ahead. There, he pointed toward a formation of overlapping rock slabs that formed a natural shelter. "It's not ideal, but it should provide enough protection." They barely made it to the shelter before the storm hit in full force. Winds howled around them as they huddled in the transport beneath the rock overhang. The radiation levels outside climbed steadily, and Thalira felt a creeping dizziness overtake her. "Your physiology," Ronan observed, noticing her distress. "It's more sensitive to radiation than mine." Her vision began to blur. "Novalians metabolize certain radiation types, but this, too much." Ronan moved quickly, retrieving medical supplies from the emergency kit. "This will help neutralize the effects," he explained, preparing an injection. "I've transported Novalians before. I know the treatment." Thalira wanted to resist to maintain her distrust, but the pain was becoming unbearable. She nodded weakly, extending her arm with its faintly luminescent veins. Gently, far more gently than she would have believed possible from a human, Ronan administered the injection. As the medication spread through her system, relief followed. When the worst had passed, she found herself lying on a makeshift bed in the rear of the transport, a thermal blanket covering her. "Why," she whispered when Ronan checked on her hours later, the storm still raging outside. "Why help me? I'm nothing to you, just cargo to deliver." Something passed across his face then, a shadow of emotion quickly controlled. Because helping is what people should do, he said simply. Human, Novelian, or otherwise. As Thalira drifted back to sleep, her last conscious thought was that perhaps everything she'd been taught about humans might not be entirely true after all. "We need to stop for supplies," Ronan announced on the 8th day as they approached a collection of ramshackle structures on the horizon. Outpost 37, not the most reputable place, but the only option for the next 1,000 kilometers. Thalira felt a flutter of anxiety. Since the radiation storm, something had shifted between them. A tentative truce, perhaps even the beginnings of respect. But entering a populated area meant facing others who might not share Ronan's unexpected decency. "Here," he handed her a hooded cloak. "Your markings identify your noble house, best to remain anonymous." The outpost proved to be a gathering of mismatched buildings constructed from salvaged materials. Various species mingled in the dusty central area: traders, smugglers, and those who had chosen to make this harsh land their home. Ronan parked the transport at the edge of the settlement. "Stay close," he murmured as they made their way toward the supply depot. "Don't make eye contact. Let me do the talking." The depot's proprietor, a heavy-set Loraxian with multiple eye stalks, barely looked up as they entered. "IPA transport," he grunted, recognizing Ronan. "The usual." "Double water rations this time," Ronan replied. "And oxygen supplements. Had a radiation storm near the western ridge." As the Loraxian shuffled to gather supplies, Thalira noticed 3 figures enter the depot behind them. 2 humans and a reptilian saurid, all wearing the distinctive armored gear of bounty hunters. Her pulse quickened as one of them nudged another, nodding in their direction. Ronan had noticed too. His posture changed subtly, weight shifting to the balls of his feet, one hand casually moving closer to his jacket where Thalira now knew he kept a compact pulse weapon. "Time to go," he said quietly, placing payment on the counter. "Now." They didn't make it to the door before the largest of the hunters stepped forward. "Transport driver," he called, his voice carrying enough authority to stop them. "Inspection of cargo, IPA protocol." Ronan turned slowly. "My documentation is in order. There's no inspection scheduled at this outpost." The hunter smiled unpleasantly. "New regulations. You wouldn't want to violate the peace treaty, would you?" "There's no new regulation," Ronan replied evenly. "Stand aside." The tension in the air thickened. Thalira's cloak had slipped slightly, revealing the edge of her house markings. The Saurid's eyes widened in recognition. "Vexer," he hissed. "High bounty, political value." What happened next unfolded with stunning speed. Ronan shoved Thalira behind a storage unit as the hunters drew weapons. A blast scorched the wall where she'd been standing a moment before. Ronan fired 3 precise shots from his pulse weapon, not killing blows, but disabling hits to limbs and weapons. "Run," he shouted, grabbing her arm as they burst from the depot and sprinted toward their transport. Weapons fire erupted around them. Thalira felt a burning pain across her shoulder as a shot grazed her. Ronan pulled her behind him, using his body as a shield as they reached the vehicle. He slammed the ignition sequence and the transport roared to life, wheels spinning in the sand before finding purchase. They tore away from the outpost, but not before Ronan jerked forward with a grunt of pain. Blood darkened the sleeve of his jacket. "You're hurt," Thalira gasped once they'd put some distance between themselves and the outpost. "I'll live," he replied tersely, scanning the terrain ahead. "We need to find cover before they organize a pursuit. There's a canyon system ahead. We can lose them there." An hour later, Ronan guided the transport into a narrow ravine, eventually finding a cavern large enough to conceal their vehicle. The wound in his arm had soaked through his makeshift bandage. "Let me help you," Thalira insisted, reaching for the medical kit. He regarded her with surprise. "You know human physiology." "Basic medical training was part of noble education," she replied, already pulling out antiseptic and synthetic skin patches, even for supposed enemies. As she cleaned and dressed his wound with careful precision, Ronan watched her face. "You could have used that distraction to escape," he observed. Thalira's hands paused momentarily. "And go where? Besides," she added quietly, "you risked your life to protect me when you could have handed me over for the bounty." Later, as they sat in the darkness of the cavern, the silence between them felt different, charged with unspoken questions. Why are you really doing this job, Ronan? Thalira finally asked. Transporting political exiles across death zones can't be your life's ambition. In the dim emergency lighting, his face seemed suddenly vulnerable. I was a soldier during the war, he said after a long pause. Saw things, did things I'm not proud of. When the peace treaty was signed, I couldn't go back to normal life. This job, it's a form of atonement, I suppose. For what? For believing we were right simply because we were stronger. He met her gaze directly. For not questioning orders that devastated worlds like yours. Thalira felt something shift within her chest, a complex emotion she couldn't name. And you, Thalira Vexer? Ronan asked. What drove a noble to join the resistance, knowing the consequences? She looked away. The same, perhaps, believing we were right simply because we were first. This was our world before your kind arrived. When she looked back, Ronan was closer than before, close enough that she could see flecks of amber in his copper eyes. Her breath caught as his hand tentatively rose to touch the faint luminescence of the markings on her cheek. We're more alike than either of our peoples would care to admit, he whispered. In the darkness of the canyon, with danger still pursuing them, Thalira realized with startling clarity that the barriers between them were crumbling faster than she had ever thought possible. The canyon provided shelter for 2 days while they evaded pursuit. By the third morning, Ronan deemed it safe enough to continue their journey, though they would need to take a less direct route to avoid the hunters who were undoubtedly still searching for them. We'll need to cross the shattered plains, he explained, showing Thalira their new route on the navigation system. It's more dangerous terrain but less likely to be patrolled. The shattered plains proved aptly named, a vast expanse of fractured earth where tectonic instability had created a maze of crevasses and unstable ground. Progress was slow as Ronan carefully navigated the treacherous path. We're halfway to the border, he mentioned as they made camp that evening. 5 more days, maybe 6 with this detour. Thalira nodded, surprised to find herself not entirely relieved at the prospect. The thought of reaching their destination suddenly seemed bittersweet. What happens when we reach the border? She asked, voicing the question that had been building within her. Ronan poked at the small heating unit, not meeting her eyes. You'll be processed by the Neutral Territories Immigration Authority. They'll give you asylum status, help you start a new life. And you? I'll return to Novalis Prime, pick up another assignment. The simplicity of his answer struck her with unexpected force. Of course, this was merely a job to him, a mission to complete before moving on to the next exile, the next transport across the wastes. I see, she said, struggling to keep her voice neutral. But something in her tone must have betrayed her, for Ronan looked up sharply. The distance he'd maintained all day, ever since their moment of connection in the canyon, seemed to waver. Thalira, he began, then stopped, clearly searching for words. Things aren't usually this complicated. Complicated how? She challenged, suddenly tired of the unspoken tension between them. You know how, his voice had dropped lower. This isn't supposed to happen. The night air around them seemed to still, the usual sounds of the desert fading to insignificance. Thalira moved closer, heart racing beneath her ribcage. What isn't supposed to happen, Ronan? Instead of answering, he reached out, fingers tracing the luminescent patterns that spiraled down her arm. Her skin responded instinctively, the bioluminescence brightening at his touch. She heard his sharp intake of breath. Beautiful, he murmured. The word broke something open between them. Thalira leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his in the traditional Novalian gesture of intimacy. For a moment he remained frozen, then his hand came up to cradle the back of her neck. This is forbidden, she whispered against his skin. I know. His lips found hers, alien and yet somehow right, differences in physiology forgotten as they surrendered to what had been building since that moment in the canyon. Luminescent patterns flared across Thalira's skin as they discovered each other beneath the vast desert stars, their bodies learning a new language that transcended the barriers between their worlds. Later, wrapped in thermal blankets and each other's arms, Thalira traced the scar that ran along Ronan's face. Where did you get this? Final battle for Novalis, he admitted quietly. Your resistance fighters nearly took my eye. She stilled. You fought against my people directly. Yes, he didn't try to soften the truth. I was part of the force that secured your capital. Thalira pulled away slightly, reality intruding harshly. Then you might have killed people I knew, friends, family. It's possible, Ronan acknowledged, pain evident in his voice. Just as your resistance fighters killed many of mine, that's the reality of war. She sat up, drawing the blanket around her shoulders. How can this be anything but a mistake? Our peoples. Our peoples are not us, Ronan interrupted, sitting up beside her. I'm not asking you to forgive what humans did to Noveles. I'm asking you to see me, not just my species. And when we reach the border, she asked, the question that truly haunted her. What then? Ronan looked away toward the horizon where their journey would end. I don't know, he admitted. I've never faced this question before. The honesty of his uncertainty was somehow more comforting than any false promises would have been. Thalira leaned against him, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart beneath her cheek. Perhaps, she suggested softly, we don't need to decide everything tonight. In the days that followed, their journey took on a dreamlike quality. The harsh reality of the wasteland contrasted with moments of tenderness neither had expected to find. They traveled by day and explored their connection by night, both aware of the border that loomed ever closer, bringing with it decisions neither felt ready to make. Tell me about your home, Ronan asked one evening. Not what was in my mission briefing, but what you love about it. Thalira described the crystal spires of her family's estate, the annual festival of lights where the bioluminescence of her people transformed the capital into a living constellation. Ronan spoke of Earth's oceans, the forests where he'd grown up, the simple pleasures of rain falling on leaves. Both carefully avoided the topic of what would happen when their journey ended, until they couldn't anymore. We reach the border tomorrow, Ronan said on their 12th night, voice tight with emotion he no longer tried to hide. We need to talk about what happens next. Before Thalira could respond, the proximity alarm on their transport erupted in urgent warning. Ronan was on his feet instantly, scanning the darkness beyond their camp. Multiple vehicles approaching, he reported grimly. Fast. The bounty hunters had found them. Dawn broke across the Krell wastes as Thalira and Ronan sped toward the border, now less than 50 kilometers away. Behind them, 3 pursuit vehicles closed the gap with relentless determination. The bounty hunters had grown in number since their encounter at the outpost, now a coordinated team rather than opportunistic individuals. They must have been tracking us since the canyon, Ronan shouted over the roar of the engine pushed beyond its recommended limits. The transport shuddered as they hit uneven terrain at dangerous speeds. Someone at the outpost planted a tracker. A blast from behind caught the edge of their vehicle, sending it fishtailing across the sand. Ronan fought for control, his face set in grim concentration. The border facility is just beyond that ridge, he said, pointing ahead to a distant mesa. If we can make it there, the neutral peacekeepers will intervene. Another blast rocked them, this one striking closer to the engine compartment. Warning lights flashed across the dashboard. We're losing power, Thalira observed, fear tightening her throat. We won't make it at this rate. Ronan's eyes darted between the pursuing vehicles and the navigation display. There's a narrow canyon ahead, too tight for their larger vehicles. If we can reach it, we might gain some distance. The canyon appeared before them, a jagged slash in the desert floor barely wide enough for their transport. Ronan steered directly for it, ignoring the proximity warnings screaming from the dashboard. Hold on, he shouted as they plunged into the narrow passage, scraping against rock walls with a shriek of tearing metal. Behind them, the lead pursuit vehicle attempted to follow, only to become wedged between the canyon walls. The others pulled back, presumably searching for a way around. That won't hold them long, Ronan said grimly, checking the fuel systems. And we're leaking coolant. Engine will overheat in 15 minutes, maybe less. They emerged from the canyon into a flat expanse that stretched toward the border facility now visible in the distance, a collection of fortified buildings flying the neutral territory's flag. So close, yet impossibly far given their vehicle's condition. We need to make a decision, Ronan said, bringing the transport to a stop behind a rock formation that provided temporary cover. I can rig the engine to overload. The explosion would serve as a distraction. You take the emergency pack and run for the border while I hold them off. No, Thalira seized his arm. That's suicide, Ronan. The look he gave her was filled with a tenderness that made her chest ache. This is my job, Thalira, getting you safely across the border. It's not just a job anymore, and you know it, her voice broke. We'll find another way. Before he could argue further, the sound of approaching vehicles announced the hunters had found a way around the canyon. Ronan's expression hardened as he made a decision. The slope to our right, he said, pointing to a steep embankment. It leads to higher ground with better visibility. The transport can't make it up there, but we can on foot. We'll have better defensive position. Grabbing essential supplies and his pulse weapon, Ronan led Thalira up the treacherous slope just as the first bounty hunter vehicle appeared on the horizon. They reached a plateau of rock that offered both cover and a clear view of the surrounding terrain. 8 of them, Ronan reported, scanning through enhanced vision binoculars. Well armed, they've split into 2 groups to surround us. Thalira looked toward the border facility, tantalizingly visible yet still too far to reach on foot before the hunters intercepted them. The peacekeepers must see what's happening, she said, desperate for any hope. Why don't they send help? Neutral territory policy, Ronan explained grimly. They can only intervene once we cross their boundary line. We're still in contested territory. The first shots from the hunters struck the rocks near their position, sending stone shards flying. Ronan returned fire, his precision evident as one of the attackers fell. But they were outnumbered and outgunned, their position gradually being surrounded. Thalira, Ronan said, his voice suddenly calm despite the chaos around them. There's something I need to tell you. She turned to him, struck by the intensity in his eyes. My first assignment as a transport driver was for your brother. Thalira froze. Khajiin, he's alive. Ronan nodded. Alive and leading a peaceful diplomatic movement in the neutral territories. He asked me to look for you if I ever transported another Vexor. Said you'd likely follow in his revolutionary footsteps eventually. Hope and shock warred within her. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Security protocol, and later. He grimaced as another blast hit nearby. Other complications arose. A plan formed suddenly in Thalira's mind. She reached for Ronan's communication device. Signal frequency for the border facility. Understanding dawned in his eyes as he quickly input the codes. Thalira activated the emergency channel. Border control, this is Thalira Vexor of Novalis Prime. I invoke Article 7 of the Peace Treaty, asylum for political persecution with imminent threat to life. The response was immediate. Verification required for Article 7 invocation. House Vexor authorization code Epsilon Theta 93, she recited. Brother to Khajiin Vexor, currently under neutral territory protection. A tense moment passed before the reply came. Verification confirmed. Border Patrol dispatched to your coordinates. Hold position. Ronan stared at her in amazement. Article 7, how did you know about that? Noble education, she replied with a grim smile. Some lessons were useful after all. Their momentary relief vanished as a concentrated barrage of fire struck their position. Ronan grunted in pain as a shot caught him in the side, burning through his jacket. Ronan, Thalira cried, pulling him deeper into cover. I'm all right, he gasped, though the spreading stain on his clothing told a different story. But they're getting closer. The Border Patrol won't reach us in time. His assessment proved correct as the hunters closed in from multiple directions, using the rocky terrain for cover as they advanced. Ronan continued to return fire one-handed, his other arm pressed against his wound. Go, he urged Thalira. While there's still a gap to the east, I'll cover you. I'm not leaving you, she insisted. This isn't a debate. His voice rose with desperate intensity. Please, Thalira, I can buy you time. The look they exchanged contained everything they hadn't said. Regrets, possibilities, a future they might never see. Thalira pressed her forehead to his in the Novalian gesture that had come to mean so much. When I signal run, Ronan whispered against her skin. But as he pulled away, preparing for his last stand, Thalira made a different choice. Instead of retreating, she grabbed his spare energy cell and loaded it into his pulse weapon. Together, she said, the luminescent patterns on her skin glowing with fierce determination. My people were warriors before we were nobles, Ronan Vale. I will not abandon my protector. Something shifted in his expression, pride mingled with resignation and perhaps something deeper. With a nod, he accepted her decision. They fought side by side as the hunters closed in, each protecting the other with a coordination that belied their brief time together. When Ronan's weapon overheated, Thalira pushed him down as shots passed overhead. When she stumbled on loose rock, his arm steadied her just in time. The Border Patrol appeared as a dust cloud on the horizon, growing larger by the second, but still too distant to provide immediate help. The bounty hunters, seeing reinforcements approaching, intensified their assault in a final desperate push. The largest hunter, clearly the leader, broke from cover with a high-powered rifle aimed directly at Thalira. Ronan saw the threat and lunged forward, knocking her aside as the shot was fired. The blast caught him squarely in the chest, throwing him backward onto the rocks. "No," Thalira's scream tore from her throat as she scrambled to his side. His breathing came in ragged gasps, blood staining his lips. "Worth it," he managed, reaching for her hand. Rage and grief fueled Thalira as she seized Ronan's fallen weapon and fired with uncanny precision at the advancing hunter. Her shot found its mark, dropping the leader just as the Border Patrol vehicles roared into range, weapons systems engaging the remaining hunters. In the chaos that followed, hunters retreating, neutral forces securing the area, Thalira remained at Ronan's side, refusing to be separated as the medical team loaded him onto a transport. "Status," she demanded of the medic who worked frantically over Ronan's still form. "Critical but stable," came the terse reply. "Your human has a remarkable will to live." "Your human?" The words echoed in Thalira's mind as the border facility came into view, its gates opening to admit them to safety at last. Their journey across the Krell wastes was over, but a different journey was just beginning. 3 weeks later, Thalira stood by a window in the medical wing of the Neutral Territory's diplomatic compound, watching the twin suns set over the distant wasteland they had survived together. Behind her, Ronan slept peacefully, his recovery progressing faster than the doctors had predicted. A message notification chimed softly on her communication device. Her brother Kazan, now working within the diplomatic corps, had forwarded the latest proposed amendment to the peace treaty, one that would allow for mixed-species relationships and dual citizenship. The growing number of border romances, as they were being called, had finally forced recognition of a reality both governments had tried to ignore. Thalira smiled, turning back to the bed where Ronan was stirring awake, his copper eyes finding hers immediately. "How long was I out?" he asked, voice still rough from sleep. "Just a few hours," she replied, moving to sit beside him. "The doctor says you'll be cleared for discharge tomorrow." He reached for her hand, fingers intertwining with hers. And then? The question hung between them, the same one they had avoided throughout their journey, now unavoidable in the safety they had fought so hard to reach. "And then," Thalira said, luminescent patterns brightening with emotion, "we write our own path together." Ronan pulled her closer, his smile reflected in her eyes as the last light of the setting suns cast the room in a golden glow. Beyond the window, the wasteland stretched toward the horizon, no longer a barrier, but a testament to what they had survived to find each other. Not all monsters looked the way she'd been told, Thalira thought as she leaned down to press her forehead against his, and not all heroes wore armor. Some simply drove transport vehicles across deadly terrain, and changed worlds in the process.